The weekdays affect all parts of the north, and we've seen those cancellations everywhere, but disproportionately in the west. The Sundays issue affects mainly the west, and particularly the west, and the impact of Sundays is very high in terms of the level of cancellations, and we've seen do not travel notices, etc., put out on various routes on Sundays. So an impact across the north, but disproportionately on Sundays in the west and the northern can take. But actually there are deep-rooted issues that need addressing. Because Northern's been in breach for 3 periods, as we reported to committee earlier in the summer, that's a contractual breach. The Rail North Partnership that manages the contract on behalf of DfT and Transport for the North requires Northern to produce a remedial plan. That's in draft, and a final draft is due to be submitted this week. So that will need to address it will address the underlying issues that Northern are facing. Committee will want to see that and scrutinise it, and that is something we're going to bring to committee at the next formal meeting on the 20th. We do know that there are some short-term actions that Northern can take around rest day working that particularly help weekdays, and agreements around Sundays that would obviously help that day of the week. So there are areas, I think, to discuss with Northern about where we can support them, but there are also areas where I'm sure you'll want to push Northern about actions, how they can improve the situation for passengers around things like replacement buses. And I think particularly we've identified, as you mentioned, some risks in the run-up to the Christmas period, which historically tends to be worst performance of the year. So I think they are probably areas to explore and agree some actions on. But I think, Chair, with that, I'll probably hand over to Tricia and Matt to update the committee.
Thank you, David. That's a very helpful steer. So, Tricia, Matt, I will hand the floor to you now. If I could ask perhaps for no more than 10 minutes between you, just so that we do leave as much time as possible for members' questions. David has pointed to the issues that we will no doubt wish to cover, but I'll pause it there for now, and Tricia, come to you first.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, Tricia Williams, MD of Northern. And the first thing I wanted to say is just an acknowledgement that the service is not where we want it to be or for our customers, and an apology for that. We are acutely aware of the impact that our service, when we have to cancel services, has on customers and their day-to-day activities, including weekends. We do have a shared ambition for the North, and for the performance to be significantly improved 7 days a week. We recognise our contribution to the economy, which you mentioned earlier. We do understand the root causes of why we are where we are. We have been very transparent with stakeholders. We've been very transparent with this committee for some time now. And as David mentioned, we have a plan that we have been working on with Rail North Partnership and the stakeholders, and that is due, as David said, for submission this week. But there are historic and complex issues which we will need to address. The facts are that our train crew, specifically conductors in Northern, do not have to work on a Sunday in the Northwest. That is a fact, and we do need to work on how to address that in the longer term. What that does mean in the short term is that on a Sunday we do have to cancel trains. Alongside this, as David mentioned, we do not have a rest day working agreement in place for our drivers, and with sickness tracking above pre-COVID levels, that makes it very hard for us actually to cover any sickness spikes. And we have to make trade-offs to carry out essential training, for example. There has been significant underinvestment for a long time in Northern. In the last 4 years, under government control, we have seen investment improved. We have seen that in our facilities for our colleagues. We will continue to ask for more and put those business cases forward, specifically for reform for terms and conditions. Our plan has 2 critical activities with regard to that, which would address rest day working and an agreement for conductors to work on Sundays. I've met very recently in the last couple of months, I've met with both the Rail Minister, I've met with the Secretary of State, and they are very supportive of our plan. But in the short term, that doesn't help, and it doesn't help the situation with Sundays. So Matt can talk about some of the areas that we can strengthen. I would hasten to say at this point that there is no quick fix. There are trade-offs to be made. But as I mentioned earlier, we are acutely aware of how frustrating this is, and clearly here to answer any questions, listen to any ideas that colleagues have got on the call that you think we can do differently or have missed. And I will hand over to Matt just to bring some of those choices to life.
Thank you. And I'll echo my own personal apologies to everyone who's been impacted. And just to, again, call out to a lot of not just customers, but to the colleagues who are also sort of residents of the north who are suffering this, both as trying to travel, but also trying to turn up to work. So this is quite a personal issue for Tricia and I know it'll be personal to everyone on this call. So it's not for want of trying, but it's complicated. I think what this meeting and the breach response that David referred to as call to arms is that, just again to go back to what are we doing most immediately, even if it is at odds with what running a train service should really be about. And I think one of the things we're still not getting quite right is certainty to customers, even if that means certainty there won't at times be a train service. So I think let's just talk about some of those things. So for 4 or 5 months in the period that David refers to, we definitely have been trying to, on a relatively short time frame, so within a week time frame, work out who's going to volunteer to work on certain routes, who isn't, how do we patchwork quilt that together to make available a train service connecting some of the cities and towns, places that are represented in school. We've got that right some weekends, but too often it hasn't quite worked and we've ended up leaving people behind. So I think one of the things that we've sharpened our pencils on in the last 3 or 4 days again is how do we make more direct intervention working with stakeholders to say whether or not there is going to be a train service. So we're going to try and stretch that out to at least a weekly run rate and dealing with that very locally, both in combined authority areas, but also local authorities. We are going to go beyond where we have been previously, strengthening our bus provision. Now, we don't have a direct contract with all the bus suppliers in the north of England. I think, look, candidly, it's not in our psyche. We're kind of reluctant to try and bring buses to bear, but to the point that Chair made and David introduced, fundamentally our job is moving people, and if we can't move them by train, we're going to amplify our efforts over in November, and then we're getting ready for December as needed for bus provision. Again, it's not where we want to be, but given the macro issues, it at least gives people the chance to move around the economies with some certainty. We're just very much not just reflecting, but looking at how we change some of our language. So we recognise that in the medium term, short term, medium and long term, things like do not travel just don't work. It casts a shadow on rail and public transport generally. So working very much with local teams, we're going to unlock some of our marketing skills. We do quite a good job in some of our positive areas as to how we can get our messaging a bit more nuanced, a bit more purposeful. It may not to move away from the quite traditional rail, do not travel, or certainly do a bit more check before you travel, but actually try to look to advertise the journey opportunities that are available in the short term, whilst we're still relying on a heavily volunteer railway, particularly at weekends, and some of these more seasonal issues that we're seeing when the weekdays become more acute. David touched upon the Christmas thing. I think the key thing for us to do in November is see what progress we get on some of the asks that and some of the work that Trish has been doing with central government. That will help if it progresses. And if it doesn't, it's just about, I think it's very much about getting ahead of local issues. So we know there'll be big events in December particularly that we have to work together to protect. As it currently stands, it will probably mean that there'll be some services that we won't be able to run. But what we'll do is move away from trying to do lots of things where perhaps we're not doing many of them well, to doing a more discrete list of services, more discrete lines of routes between core economies and core events, and putting a high level of guarantee on the service. I'll sort of bring that to a close by bookending, but none of that is where we want to be. We want to run the 2,500 trains a day in the weekday, the sort of 1,500 or so we promise on a Sunday, reliably. The breach plan that David talked about goes in draft hopefully tomorrow, sets out that ambition. It is a longer term view. but nobody wants to be sat saying, don't worry, Jan's coming tomorrow, because Northern's problems have been deep-rooted for 8 or 9 years at least, and I think it's time we dealt with those. In the short term, we're just trying to give customers certainty about what we can do, and working with people on this call and communities to be clear about what we can't do, so that we're not leaving people behind, basically, or ruining plans.
Well, thank you to you both, and I appreciate the direct way in which you've addressed the issues and the honesty that you've shown. But I'm sure very significant issues fall out from what you've both just said that colleagues will now want to ask questions about. So, colleagues, if you could indicate, I'll just start with a few of my own, just responding to what I've just heard. You know, we accept that some of the issues are outside of your control, and we'll come back to that, and perhaps we can help bring a resolution to some of those issues. But some are definitely in your control. A significant portion are in your control, and it worries me that there isn't yet a plan, having been asked for, that is of an acceptable standard to Transport for the North. And I think it's really important that you hear the concerns of colleagues today to make sure that plan is up to scratch when it comes in. Tricia, you said you are acutely aware of the impact on customers and businesses. I would say, are you, is what the question I would ask. 155 trains have been cancelled this morning. That's thousands of people late into work, changing their day, and that is a lot of disruption, a huge amount. What really worries me is you don't appear to me to have a plan in place for these cancellations. Why have you not been in a position where tickets can be accepted on other operators? No agreement has been put in place for that. Why has there not been rail replacement services for people? It doesn't seem to me that you do understand the level of disruption to people, because you haven't put in place acceptable arrangements to help people in these circumstances. And as I understand it, it's been my team at Transport for Greater Manchester that have had to push you to put in place arrangements. So, Tricia, I'm going to come back to you. Are you really acutely aware? Because if you were, wouldn't you have put in place proper arrangements to support people affected by cancellations?
I am acutely aware. I use trains every single day of the week, and I see the complaints that come through to me. So I am absolutely acutely aware. In terms of rail replacement, we don't always know where those cancellations are going to fall. So we, as Matt said, can do more in terms of rail replacement. There isn't a limitless capacity to put rail replacement on. We've got other engineering works. We've got the Transpennine route upgrade, where we're using buses to make sure that people can get to where they need to get to. And we do work with other operators to look at where the services can be, where customers can have their tickets accepted. Some of that is very reactive, and it puts a huge strain on the team. And they're constantly and often heroically trying to make decisions at the very last minute, which often mean that some of the mitigating actions we can take aren't taken. And that's, I think, the point that Matt made before, that in order to give customers certainty, we might need to cancel earlier in order to put those plans in place.
I understand what you're saying, but it's not a full answer, I'm afraid. It's not just about, you have late decisions and therefore you struggle to get a bus. We've had requests for you to put in place arrangements with other rail operators to have ticket acceptance that have not been accepted. So if you can't get buses, at least you've got to have alternative options for people who've bought your tickets. Why haven't you done that?
Well, we do that. We do that when we can, and we do work with other train operating companies to accept our tickets.
Well, as my briefing tells me, that Transport for Greater Manchester have made requests around any TOC ticket arrangements that have not been granted, and also that our asks for you to use discretion on penalty fares also have not been granted. Is that not the case?
So on the latter, on penalty fares, we absolutely have changed our position on penalty fares. So we have paused prosecutions on a number of penalty fares where we understand that the ticketing is very complex and complicated for customers. So we have done that. We have paused prosecutions on a number of issues. Clearly, if somebody's trying to travel without a ticket, then that is not acceptable in any situation, and we will continue our process for that.
Specifically, I've been told that Southport passengers have not been given the permission to travel via Preston or Liverpool. Is that correct?
I'll have to check that, Andy. Sorry, Chair, because I come in on the Southport line on many occasions, and there's no if somebody's travelling from Southport into Manchester, then you can go via Preston, and you can use Northern trains to do that. I think the issue is not every other top will accept a Northern ticket. I think that is your point, that we haven't got a blanket agreement in place and I think that is something that rail reform will bring. I think it will bring simplified ticketing. I think it will bring the ability for customers to use different train operating companies. That isn't in place at the moment.
Well, it should be. When people have bought a ticket, they should be able to travel. And I think it's on the tops now to get that in place between yourselves. In my understanding, you could put that in place. And I would say it should be in your plan. If you're going to continue to reduce the timetable, as Matt seems to be suggesting, and that sounds quite alarming, I have to say, given the Christmas market period in Greater Manchester and all of that, what that means for our economy. If that's what you're saying, it is essential, absolutely essential, that you have an agreement in place where people who have tickets can use alternative routes to get home. I mean, that has to be in your plan when it comes back to us. I can see Mayor Bravin's hand up, so I will kind of ask one final question, and it relates to what you said about sickness. How has it got to the point where Northern has a sickness rate of 11%?
So our sickness rate isn't tracking at 11%. We will have some groups of teams where it is tracking higher than average. Matt will be able to give us the specifics on train crew sickness, for example. But there are spikes of sickness. So you might get a situation where you have a team who all catch the same bug and they do have higher sickness, but that is short term. What is affecting us at the moment is long term sickness that is tracked higher than before.
Let me put the question another way then. Why is your sickness rate higher than other operators?
Our sickness rate is not necessarily higher than other operators. We're not the highest. But I'm not saying that is where we want to be, or we want to improve our sickness. One of the areas is mental health, so that is our highest root cause of sickness, and clearly that is something that is something that we have got activities to address. We've got a plan for absence. We've got a plan that is reducing our absence, and one of the activities we are doing, or the actions we've taken, is to actually reflect the higher sickness levels in our establishment number. So we are recruiting more people. It's not where we want to be. We've reduced sickness overall, but in the short term, we don't have the ability to cover short-term sickness without a rest day work agreement. So we're not tracking the highest. We are comparable with other operators. We have got activities in place to reduce that sickness. It's very difficult for us to cover sickness without a rest day working agreement in place.
Do you have enough staff?
Yes, we do. We have enough drivers. We have enough conductors. We've probably got more drivers, conductors than in Northern's history, certainly in Northern's recent history. We have absolutely no problem recruiting. We have no problem training in our classroom environments, and we've got good training. The issue is when our drivers, for example, come out into our train crew depots, we need to be able to train them on different types of trains and different routes. And if we, again, I go back to the issue of rest day working, by bringing in more drivers, that just compounds the problem in some areas.
Well, I think our residents will find it hard to reconcile what you've just said with the fact that they can see a part-time railway in operation, and you're going to have to convince people that you can deploy the staff that you have in a way that deals with some of the issues that we're discussing this morning. So I'll go to Tracy Brabin now. Tracy, over to you.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you so much, Tricia and Matt, for coming on the call. And we work closely together in the Strategic Rail Partnership Group. I've always valued your honesty, but I'm incredibly disappointed in what I've just heard, because it feels like you're bringing in an emergency timetable. Even though we are moving towards nationalisation, you're unable to get a system together where you can share tickets so people can go on their journeys without having to pay extra costs. And we're in the run up to Christmas, we're talking about bus replacement, when on the Calder Valley, and that's where we're hit the most, Calder Valley last Wednesday in the evening, 13 trains cancelled between 5 o'clock in the evening and the end of service. I mean, we're looking at Christmas and the Peace Hall, which is one of West Yorkshire's crowning glories for Christmas market, and nobody can get there or get home after 5 o'clock. And it just feels like I'm not quite sure that it's landing how important this is as part of the wider picture, particularly across the mayors, whether that's Ollie or Andy or David, where across the north we know that our economy is really, it really hangs by a thread whether the transport is there and fit for purpose. So it's very troubling that we've had the answers that we've had. So a couple of things as well, Tricia, that you said you've got more drivers and more conductors than ever before, but the backlog of staff training has stalled. So what's happened there? Why is the staff training stalled? And how can we give the public confidence that Northern is a company that looks after the passenger, when yet again we have poor provision of passenger assistance? And you'll know that you've been criticised by the OOR regulator for a lack of support for those with a disability. It's got to be inclusive and also reliable. So unfortunately, you're getting a lot of heat about this, but it's just not good enough, particularly in the run up to Christmas. And I know there's greater issues on Mayor Burnham's side of the Pennines rather than us, but that Calder Valley line is absolutely pivotal, particularly for the Christmas economy.
Thank you, Mayor Brabin. I think a couple of things just on the both what the chair referenced and yourself. I think it's important that we talk about temporary timetables, restrictions in timetables. So absolutely nothing is decided. We wouldn't make a decision without working with you. I think the message I want people to have is that if there's a recognition that we do at times rely on volunteers to run some of the railway, what we must do together is make choices to protect what's most important if we're having to choose. We don't want to have to choose, but I think what we've learned over the last 4 or 5 months and historically is not choosing puts at risk unplanned issues, and big events become at large. And I think that's the work we will do together in November. I think the other thing that is still very much at the heart of how we take Northern forward, move over the longer term, is the breadth of difference. So you're absolutely right. The Calder Valley is not a high performing part of our network. The intricacy of that is because of where it comes from, where it goes to, and where it starts from. And I think the alternative is there are 400 or 500 trains in the West Yorkshire area that never fail to broadly deliver, which is it's a complexity that is, and I'm not saying that to distract from the pain points. But I am saying that when we move Northern forward, we have to get this more local, because looking at it as a 2,500 train business means that if you take Mayor Burnham's sickness numbers, 11% is happening in some of our depots. Some of our depots it's down at 3 or 4%, and we've got to bring some of that good stuff together. But also, I think we're not helping the North at times by treating Northern as one big thing. We've got to look at how we pivot our approach to that. But I think, again, given particularly this is, again, the significance to people on this call, the public nature of it, I do not want the message to be anything other than we have made no decisions over the next 8 weeks on what the timetable looks like. We will work with people to make the best decision for each local economy and make choices based on the train crew we can guarantee we can turn out, and make a value choice about where there might be a bit of risk but still protects what we can in the local area. On the Calder Valley thing, Mayor Braben, I just need to go back and look at what happened last Wednesday to make sure there's anything that was no own goals, but I'll come back to you and your team on that.
Can I pick up on the other 2 points there you mentioned? So training hasn't stalled. We would like it to go faster. So if we had rest day working for our drivers, for example, we can the trade-offs are easier because at the moment we are having to cancel trains to protect training. As Matt says, this is a big geography. If we look at some of the training that we've protected at the moment, alongside the necessary training that we have for safety, for route knowledge, to keep our drivers competent, we're also protecting training for the Northumberland line, which is a line that's due to open soon in the North East. And we've also had some trains cascaded from the West Midlands, new trains for us, which will help strengthen our services post-Christmas. So we've had to make difficult decisions to cancel trains in order to keep that training beat rate going. We would like it to be accelerated. So it hasn't stalled, it's just not going as fast as we would like it. So that is the point on training. In terms of assistance, passenger assistance, performance is clearly impacting passenger assistance. If we're cancelling trains as we are, then clearly somebody who needs assistance is being let down. We're working with the ORR, we've been working with Transport for North and Rail North Partnership on our plan for that. That has meant putting more people in places like Leeds, which is our biggest area, Leeds station for passenger assistance. It's changes to policies, to processes, to systems, but performance is clearly having an impact on assistance.
Thank you both. And Matt, picking up on your point, I think all of us would like to talk in much more detail now about how we come to a different future here, where there is much more local involvement in the running of Northern. So I appreciate your pivot. You're pivoting towards that, and absolutely that is part of the long-term solution. And we need to think about that as well as dealing with the present. But I welcome the fact that you recognise that the time has come to consider the rails system as part of an integrated system like the B network, and we'll want to work with you further on that. Lord McLaughlin, and then Councillor Foakes next.
Thank you, Chair. I won't go over some of the areas that have already been covered. I think points have been made. Trish, I was slightly surprised that you said that you have got enough staff when so many cancellations are having to come into being. Just a couple of points. I just wonder, what stops you having an agreement, a much quicker agreement about cross-ticket use, particularly with TPE and East Coast, which are both basically operated by the operator of last resort anyway. So I would have hoped on those two, at least those two services, it would be much quicker and much easier to be able to get a joint ticketing agreement. I mean, I hear what you say about rail reform, but that's some way off yet, and the immediate is what's going to happen. And I suppose the other question is, when do you actually take the decision on P coding? And are you finding cases where you've taken a decision on P coding, you've taken them in the best of interest, but you could have actually provided the service, because actually the absenteeism has not turned out like you may have expected it to be, but because you've already P coded it, you've not done the service. So are you P coding to try and be ultra cautious? Is that part of the issue as to why we're seeing sort of cancellations that we might not have seen?
Okay, so there's 3 points there. So enough staff, we absolutely have enough staff, despite how the cancellations are falling. And it comes back to the fact that we, on a Sunday, for example, don't have Sundays in the working week for our conductors, particularly in the Northwest. Ticket acceptance, I think, has come out as a strong area there that we can definitely do more on. So I will pick that up in the plan. And I think that those points have been well made by yourself and the chair. In terms of P-coding, I'll pass on to Matt to talk about the process that we carry out for P-coding. Just so everybody's aware, P-coding is where we pre-cancel services. So there are some services that we cancel on the day because we have sickness, for example, and that will happen in any event. The issue is that we can't cover that sickness if we don't have agreements for overtime, for example. So P-coding is where we know we've got a resource problem and we cancel in advance. I would absolutely say that we haven't been P-coding where we've got people available. In fact, we've probably been P-coding too late, believing that people will be available. And I think that is one of the fundamental changes that we can make. So I'll just bring Matt in on that point.
It just probably a bit of an echo, but if I may, Lord McLaughlin, it's a great question because it's in the heart of where I've been in the last 4 or 5 weeks. So P-coding tends to be a 72-hour activity. So you have a 3-day window when our rostering teams broadly declare the amount of people we've got. We know where our trains are, and you try to match the two together. The area where I think we have real opportunity to improve further is making sure that in that 72-hour window we are allocating those people that do turn out exactly where the biggest bang for buck is, and we simply don't have the tech or the skills to do that as quickly as we'd like. So if you were to do a lineup of the thousands of trains we look at, I would declare that somebody could find, as I've done, and Trish will be able to, 1 or 2 things you think that's probably not the right choice. It is an area of improvement, and anyone who says they're getting that perfectly right in a big operator like us will go and learn from, but I don't think we've done it yet. That is in the breach plan improvement notice. I think the thing we haven't done is bring the P-coding horizon forward. So I haven't uncovered any real reason why we can't do that. P-coding rightly has a bit of a stigma. No one wants to do it. It's been used perhaps in the past to sort of do things with numbers. We're not in that position. I see it as the tool we have to use at the moment to protect certainty for customers and economies about what trains will run and perhaps won't run. So again, my biggest fear is people turning up at stations, in particularly where we at best only run one train a day, and not having a train for 2 hours because they're isolated communities often. So certainty is what we're looking at in the very short term. And what that will mean is P-coding we'll look to bring it further forward in the working week. But if I look at November, December, that pivots back to the conversations we've had earlier with people on this call. We won't be looking to do it in isolation. We need to make sure we're aligned on where, if we've got a difficult choice, we do it for gritted teeth together.
Matt, I heard you say in answer to Lord McLaughlin there that you haven't got the right tech in place to support these processes. I've heard you're still using fax machines to do these things. Can that possibly be true?
It is very much true, Chair.
How on earth is that the case in 2024?
That is a very fair and reasonable, let's not say a question, is our challenge to get rid of them. Yeah. It's in our plans to get rid of them.
You could do it tomorrow. You could literally do that tomorrow.
We absolutely could. We will. So
why are you going to do it tomorrow?
Look, we're not going to do it tomorrow because of the business, the production, the tools we use to get messaging and information to our crew rely on faxes amazingly. We will be forced. Well, we'll get there before we're forced to, because I think fax technology in telecoms turns off. The plan that we'll put forward, or we're putting forward, is going to really.
People listening to this, Matt, will say, not necessarily either of your fault, but people will say, how come we have 3 decades of privatisation when money was being poured into the railway and you are still communicating by fax machines in 2024?
I think it's a very fair question. Our job is to get rid of them. Our job is to unleash the full potential of the sort of emerging technology revolution. And it might sound a bit glib, but the huge sort of large language models, data processing will absolutely be the heart of our rostering, our train crew information process. The nutty challenge we'll overcome in the near future is reaching the right agreement with our colleagues and forcing fax machines and that kind of archaism out the window. I think private public, it is what we've got. We've got fax machines. That is ludicrous.
I hear what you say, but it tells me, though, that your modernisation plan like your training plan, is moving nowhere near fast enough. You could get rid of this stuff tomorrow. You could just put in place IT to support people to communicate differently. And I just don't understand why you're not doing that. Hence, we get the late cancellations on a Friday evening. Because if you'd speeded up the process, surely we should be able to get earlier notice to the public. So it just looks like there's a sort of slight, I don't know, a disregard for the travelling public. You know, the railway industry will get round to it when it gets round to it, when the facts has arrived. I mean, that's how it will come over to people.
Can I just come in here? So we wouldn't be able to get rid of them tomorrow without an agreement with our trade unions. So we have to look at these issues with the depth and complexity that they have and the historical issues that we absolutely, as Matt says, are going to address. It isn't as simple as turning them off tomorrow, because at the moment we have an agreement to use the processes that we have. And in order to change that, we do have to change the agreement.
I mean, I personally don't think many people watching this would imagine replacing fax machines as issues of depth and complexity. And while it may need agreement with trade unions, people will just say, well, why wasn't that done? Why wasn't that done years ago? Why wasn't that agreement why didn't you all sit around the table and sort it out? I mean, these are the things that can be resolved. Why does the rail industry just leave things rumbling on and unresolved? That's the impression people will get, I think, from the exchange we've just had. But I'll pause it there. Councillor Fuchs, Steve, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Representing, obviously, Steve Rotherham, who gives his apologies. I was grateful that I attended the stakeholder meeting in Manchester the other week, and we went over lots of these things. Our officers describe your sickness levels as chronic. And I think in your statement, Trish, you said they are compatible. Well, I don't know who they're compatible to, but my officers describe them as chronic. And quite often the sickness levels are an indicator of a melee and a malaise in an organisation generally. They often use as an indicator for that. And morale seems to be low, and trust between the trade unions and yourselves maybe inherited, I don't know. So my questions are twofold. I've heard about the long-term plan, but is it a symptom of a dysfunctional organisation? Is it a fact that offline, is there any mileage offline of getting the trade unions, you know, us as stakeholders and yourselves, just offline, just to get to the root cause of the issues, because it doesn't seem right to us. And finally, at the stakeholder meeting, you said you had a meeting imminently with the Secretary of State Louise Haigh. Can you give us a flavour of that meeting and what was sort of discussed without breaking any confidentiality issues? Because we are, on behalf of Mayor Rotherham, we are increasingly frustrated, and I won't repeat all the other issues, but whole swathes of our city region are affected by this. So they're my general comments. And how did the talks go?
Yeah, thank you. So trust engagement, we've just done a recent colleague survey, and engagement has actually gone up. We are working really, really hard to engage our people. It is tough for them if you're a conductor who's on a crowded train because we've had to cancel a previous service, then that is a tough position to be in, and the same with our station teams. So it's very pleasing to see that engagement has actually increased. I think what I have to say is we've had 2 years of industrial relations issues. That's been at the highest national level. That has all now been resolved, and that clearly gives us an opening to talk more constructively locally. We've got good relationships locally with our trade unions. We are talking to them all the time. But I do have to just mention that backdrop has not been helpful in order to address some of these deep-rooted issues around technology, around sickness, and around things like training and terms and conditions. The Louise Haigh meeting last week, Secretary of State for Transport, was very similar to this, in as much as she wanted to talk to me about performance. I shared my plans with her, as I did with the Rail Minister last month. What I would say is that meeting was very constructive. I think people do recognise that Northern has had a level of underinvestment. We are working with stakeholders. As you said, you came to our stakeholder session a couple of weeks ago, and we are very aware of what we do need to do to improve, which includes technology, it includes training, it includes addressing some of those terms and conditions, and we had support for our plans there. So this isn't easy. This is something that Matt and I are absolutely determined to address. I feel hugely accountable for this. I feel very passionately about this, and I do want it to happen with more pace and urgency, and I will continue to work as hard as I can to make sure that that happens.
Thank you, Tricia. So I can see Councillor Gannon with his hand up, and I just would say to any other elected representatives, if you want to ask a question, please indicate now, because we'll move towards summing up around 20 past. And Laura, I can see your hand is up, so I'll come to you as we move into that phase of the meeting. So colleagues, your final chance, really. Martin, morning, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick point. I put my hand up when the comment was made about fax machines and the requirement of trade union agreement. This seems to be a sort of first of all, Trish, I do have some sympathy. You're a relatively new chief executive, so I suppose you'll know how Rachel Reeves feels this morning, having to take the blame for other people's problems. However, you are chief executive, and therefore, at some stage, like Rachel, should be responsible. Okay, so but in terms of the fax machines, and it's a recurring feature when I go through these meetings. So, it's because we need a trade union agreement. It's because we need a trade union agreement. I've got to say, I worked as a trade union officer for 25 years, and I worked with literally hundreds of companies. And I'm sorry, I just cannot accept what you said there. I've never, ever, ever had a situation where management required the agreement of a trade union in terms of, yes, of course, fundamental terms and conditions of employment, but in terms of managing the system, introducing new technology, I just don't accept that at all. I think that's that management have a responsibility to take responsibility for those things. Okay, that was the first point. Second point, though, is, and Andy, you intimated towards this, you were saying, what about the future? We want to look about the future. All we've talked about this morning is about mitigation for a failing system. Whether it's lowering public expectation, getting better information to people about cancellations, making sure that tickets can be used on different operators. It's kind of managing a decline, okay? And I accept, okay, that's absolutely right. What we need is an emergency plan in place which deals with this unacceptable situation. But Andy, you intimated towards this. What we need to do is work together, Transport for the North and the operator, to encourage people that we're actually seeking to rectify these problems permanently, and actually have whatever the solutions may be. That may mean more resources. We need to campaign with government, whatever it might be. The present system is unacceptable. Putting in place mitigations to improve an unacceptable situation, so that it lowers people's expectations, encourages people not to use the trains, to work from home, that they get better information before a service is cancelled. It's not the solution. It's mitigation, but it's not a solution. That was it.
Yeah, just to come back on that point, I totally agree. We've done some work recently, which I have shared with some stakeholders on our headroom for the market. So passenger journeys are at record levels. And we know that we have got the ability to take more people on journeys that they really need to make. And we have to address the underlying issues here. I think it's right that we're talking about mitigations that we can put in the short term, but our ambition, I think, is the same as everybody's on this call. We want to deliver a high-performing railway 7 days a week, and we have to face into some of the issues that, yes, we've inherited, but absolutely I take accountability for resolving.
If I may want to Tricia has given open door, green light, use your term if you like, for me in this role to determine what changes Northern might benefit from. And I think to your point, Councillor Gannon, the plan that we've talked about that will come in again for first review to TFN and colleagues in the next couple of days does go over the long term. It is in months and years, and I'm mindful that in a community in which I live that's had a difficult railway going back to at least May 18, if not a little bit before, if you look at the performance, we've got that absolute tension between how on earth, to the chair's point, if at 5:30 this morning I'm looking at loads of cancellations, how are we getting that right whilst also sorting fax machines out, sorting the structure of the timetable out, reorganising the business so that it fits the local agenda. All I'd say, all of those are on the list. All of those are being worked on, but they aren't a problem that will get done. I don't think anyone's saying, in fairness, they're not a problem that's going to be fixed tomorrow, and they are going to really exhaust the opportunity of things like GBR, the devolution agenda, because what Tricia doesn't want, I don't want, is to be hearing again and again saying it's the same old stuff. But it is going to mean our plan looks a little different in terms of it doesn't talk about points failures or my fleet reliability directly. It talks about the more systemic, organisational, structural timetable, societal change that we need Northern to face into.
Thank you, Matt and Tricia. And that seems a good point to bring in Laura, with mention of the reform agenda, Laura. But thank you. We appreciate you joining us, actually. It's really good for the Rail North Committee to see you with us this morning. And over to you for your observations and also that point about where this takes the reform agenda.
Well, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, everybody, for allowing me to join you this morning. It's been really, really interesting to try to understand from a collective Northern view what some of the challenges are, which are obviously huge for your region. And while I've only been in place for, a few weeks' time, some of the feedback that I've heard isn't entirely different from other bits of the country. I am going to read with interest, I think, definitely the draft of this remediation plan. It will be really interesting to me to work through that and understand what it is. And I think one of the two things that the Secretary of State has asked me to really think about is this bit about how we focus on the passenger, how it feels to the passenger, what are the improvements that can be made for the travelling public. And that will be the lens through which we look at it. But also it's really important for me in both roles that I have to talk about the role of transport infrastructure in supporting economic growth. And the other thing I've heard very clearly is that there'll need to be some sort of a resilience plan for a Northern Christmas economy, if you want to call it that. But actually, as we ramp up towards this really important time for places, how are we going to have maybe something that is bespoke that looks at what is that resilience plan going to be so that the economy is not impacted by it. And I think that's one of my reflections in sort of having been just getting started, which is, we need to think about what rail does in its ability to deliver economic growth to places. No doubt the challenges inherited by the team from, what sounds to be huge amounts of underinvestment are absolutely massive. But it's the lens through which we need to look at everything, which is what does it mean for the passenger? How do they have what I'm hearing people need, which is certainty, information, good, reliable information from which they can make decisions. So I don't pretend after an hour to be an expert in the issues of rail in the north, but I do want you to know that I have listened. I've heard quite a lot of really interesting information, and I will continue to work with your teams and with Rail North to think about how, and with the team at Northern, to try to think about how we can systematically address some of the short-term problems while putting in place the longer-term solutions, something it sounds like historically really has been underinvested in. So just to thank you from me, and just to let you all know that I am available to you all at any time. So please to be in touch on sort of any issues. It's a huge change program to think about what what GBR will be in the future. It exists in a shadow form today, but this is about trying to set out what we want in the future, and the lens by which we want to be looking at what the culture of GBR needs to be going forward. So I'd be happy to also speak to people individually about that. But thank you, Chair. It's been a real privilege to have been invited this morning, and thank you for letting me listen.
No, we should be expressing it the other way around, Laura. You being here gives us great confidence, actually, that you're going about things in exactly the right way from the start, and we really appreciate your comments just now. And actually, we really welcome your appointment. All of us, really wish you well and are here to support you in it. And we know that you understand these things from a place-based point of view, given your previous role in the West Midlands. So definitely a positive development from our point of view, and we look forward to working with you. I'll begin to draw things to a close. Tricia or Matt, anything just to add that you feel has been missed? I don't want to not give you that final opportunity.
Yeah, I'd probably just echo the points Matt made. Everything we do is about delivering value, whether that's economic, social or environmental. We make no profits. We are totally subsidised by the taxpayer, so there's often some difficult choices there. But everything we do is about our customers, and it is about making sure that we recognise the value we add from an economic point of view.
Well, I hear that, Tricia, but I think you need to do better by your customers, given some of what's been said today. We have Katie Day on the call. Katie's substituting for Martin Tugwell this morning. So, Katie, maybe when I've just done my summing up, I'll turn to you to sort of turn that into what happens next. Firstly, can I thank you both for coming? And as I said at the start, for addressing directly what we've said. And I think it is important for us to acknowledge that across other parts of the North, Northern is providing a good service when services are running. And we know you've got lots of staff who are dedicated to what they do, and not all of what we're seeing is their fault or your fault. We do accept that, but some of it is, and some of it is in your control, and that is something that cannot be missed. And sometimes the rail industry needs to accept what it can control and deal with that in a much more efficient way than sometimes it does. I think just one broad reflection, people listening to this and hearing about some of the procedures within the railway, they will probably have a kind of read across to the water industry, and they will ask, after decades of privatisation, where has the money gone? Where has the money gone in the rail industry, given that we're still using 1980s technology to communicate? And I think I speak for everybody on this call, in all of the places represented on this call, in saying the North needs better than an unreliable, facts-driven railway in 2024. So the question is, how do we get there? I see this in two parts. So some of the things are outside of your control, as I said a moment ago, and I'm going to be putting it to members that we support you in getting a resolution in those things outside of your control. And I would propose that we make representations to the government today, and particularly to the Treasury, to get that rest day working agreement in place. And also we work with the Department for Transport and the Treasury to get a plan for Sundays in place. And that is done as quickly as possible, picking up Mayor Brabin's points about the critical importance of the period that now lies ahead of us to our local economies. So, Casey, I'll maybe ask you to address that question when you sum up. But I think what we would be looking for is a letter today, probably to the Chancellor, I think, to see if we can get those arrangements in place immediately. We appreciate she's been busy, as Martin was saying, but we do need this now in place. On the second point, we've been advised that the plan isn't good enough that you've submitted, and we really do need to have now a plan that meets all of the points that have been raised today. I'm advised that you've issued do not travel notices without rail replacement buses, and that's happened on a number of occasions. That shouldn't be ever happening, in my view. I think there should always be any TOC arrangements where services are cancelled. I think you need to be better at communication and the timing of it, and we've talked about that. Better arrangements for training, for dealing with sickness. In short, we need a new plan from you, and it needs to be much better than what we've seen so far, so that we can minimise the disruption to businesses and residents as we go through the period. And I appreciate you will submit that soon. We will discuss it on the 20th of November at Rail North. We would like to get to that point where we have those agreements in place with the government and a plan from you that we feel is good enough. And that's what we must all work towards. So we do ask you to go back and interrogate every aspect of that plan and make sure that what you return to us is the very best that you can do for people who've struggled with an underperforming Northern Railway for quite a serious amount of time, and whose patience is wearing very thin or has gone altogether, and that people have lost trust in your service and are therefore driving around our city regions rather than using public transport. That's where we are here, and this is the change that we need to bring with Laura and others on this reform journey. And we appreciate not all of it lies with you, and you've inherited this, if you like, fairly antiquated set of arrangements, but we do now look to you to lead the change that Northern needs, and we will support you if you bring it, but you do need to bring that change plan. Katie, we're 1 minute over, but anything that you would just want to add now to say to members in terms of the process from here?
Thank you, Chair. Very briefly, I think members have been clear of their deep concern about the current performance and the impact that's having on people and places across the north of England. Chair, I would recommend that you write on behalf of the committee to expedite matters to the Treasury, as you've suggested, and we'll organise that with your office today. And I think, thirdly, that our Northern colleagues, thank you for joining us. I think you've heard a number of areas of reassurance that are needed, clear plans. So I think that we will follow up with you separately to set out the things that have come out of the meeting today, from tickets to Christmas to actual modernisation, to make sure that those points can be addressed and discussed at the Rail North Committee later this month. Thank you, Chair.
That's a good summary. Thank you, Katie. And if you would share a draft of that letter with members of this committee. I do think we'll need a quick turnaround, colleagues, but if we could just make sure you've all got sight of that in case there was any point you wanted to particularly add or emphasise. But presumably we'll try and get that to colleagues later in the day.
We'll try and get that out, Chair, today, and then aim to have that ideally in the right hands by the end of the week.
Yeah.
Latest.
Well, if we could get it out today, Katie, it would be good, but I appreciate that might be a stretch, but today or tomorrow. Yeah.
Well, if members can come back to us very quickly, then we will do that, absolutely. Thank you, Chair.
Excellent. Okay, thank you again, Tricia, Matt, and also Laura for joining us. Thanks for your contributions, colleagues, and we will reconvene this discussion on the 20th of November at the full meeting of the Rail North Committee. Thank you very much, everyone.